ladies and gentlemen. Great to be with you today on the second day of the World Economic Forum here in Riyadh. My name is Eleni Jokas. I'm an anchor and correspondent at CNN International. Welcome to this session on food and water for all, perhaps one of the most pivotal conversations, I believe, that is being conducted here, the most critical things that we need to secure a better future. I'd like to introduce my panelists. A very warm welcome to the Minister of Finance and National Planning of Zambia, Situmbeko Musokotwane. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
We've got the President of the African Development Bank, Akinwumi Adesina. Good to see you again. Lina Nuruddin, President and founder of Lamar Holding, and Jai Shroff, Chairman and Group Chief Executive Officer of UPL India. I'm going to just start with a few statistics because I think it's pretty important to go through them. I'm sure most of you know these numbers very well, but according to the United Nations, global water demand is projected to surpass supply by 40% by 2030. That's, in other words, after tomorrow. It's very close. It is estimated that hunger and malnutrition cost the global economy $3.5 trillion per year, and water scarcity could cost more regions up to 6% of their GDP by 2050 due to lost productivity and healthcare costs. So this is absolutely critical to come together to have this discussion, to figure out the investment that is required today for a better tomorrow, and more importantly, to ensure that some of the most vulnerable communities around the world have access to clean water, and of course, food security is paramount. Minister, I'd like to start off with you, and I want you to give me a sense of where we stand in Zambia when it comes to water security, water access, and importantly, how that feeds into the agriculture sector. The Kafue River is absolutely vital. It's this basin that supplies water to industry, it supplies most of the water to Lusaka, your capital city, and then, of course, the hydroelectric dam. And in fact, when I was looking at Zambia water resources, you have 24% higher than average access to water than most of Southern Africa, and 6% higher than the global average. Does that mean that you are water secure?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, we have a substantial amounts of water in the region, and the challenge now is how do you employ technology to make sure that that water is delivered to the people. But let me focus perhaps more on the agriculture and water, because that is critical. And the general theme of this forum is collaborate, grow the economies. So that being the case, how do we collaborate? How do we grow the economies? The story from Zambia is simple and straightforward. We collaborate by asking ourselves, what do we have as Zambia? What is that we don't have? Ask the same questions to everybody else, including the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. What do you have and what don't we have? How do we collaborate? And the answer is very simple. What we have in Zambia, plenty of land. We have plenty of water. What we don't have is the financial resources for this land and the water to be transformed into viable agriculture. So the way forward, again, is very simple. We say to you, bring your capital, bring your management expertise. Here's the land, here's the water. Let's produce food for the world.
Yeah.
So this is the clear message that we have from Zambia. All of you with money, bring it to Zambia. We are preparing the ground to be very fertile for investors. Friendly environment, secure environment, bring the money, and we'll grow the food for the world.
Minister, may I correct you? You said you have land. It needs an adjective. You have beautiful land. Zambia is one of the most beautiful places in the world, I have to say. and there's so many opportunities. And I think I can solve your money problem because we've got the African Development Bank president sitting right here. We've got beautiful land.
Right.
You've got water resources. I mean, you've got an abundance of minerals and all sorts of things available. And I know that the African Development Bank has a water strategy, and you have an agriculture strategy. You've been investing heavily across the continent. I guess the question that I always ask you is whether the money is enough, and it's enough to actually solve these issues right now, because the numbers in Africa across the board, across the entire continent, show that water availability, and actually it's the infrastructure that is the big issue, speaking to the minister's points. It's the infrastructure to get the water to people and get clean water.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. You know, I was just with the president of Zambia, and he was explaining to me the challenge that they have, even though they have water. This year, they rely so much on irrigation, right, with dams. But the dams are dry. You know, so it's not so much of the potential you have for water, it's the fact that with climate change, you don't really, even the dams that you actually need to do agriculture is not even working. You take the case of Africa today. Yeah. You have 250 million people that do not have access to water, right? And it's even getting worse with climate change, about 450 million people in water-stressed environments, right? In the case of irrigation, right, they will have to increase the capacity in Africa for irrigation from the financing today of roughly about maybe $13 billion to $78 billion by 2050 for us to be able to meet the needs for food and agriculture on the continent.
Because it's the irrigation that's a big issue in terms of going to commercial farming.
It's the irrigation infrastructure, and many of the irrigation infrastructure are actually quite old, and therefore they need to be re-engineered in many of the cases. But even in terms of bulk water, for people to drink water and so on, we are under-investing in water. That's the thing. Today, we're investing in water only $8 billion of the total amount of maybe $80 billion that goes to infrastructure goes to water. Only 10% of it goes to water.
What should that number actually be?
Well, that number should actually be anything between $45 billion and $53 billion a year. And so what we're doing at African Development Bank is we've invested, at least in the last 3 years, more than $3 billion in water alone. And our work has helped to connect 50 million people to water, but also provide 17 million people with access to sanitation. But that's not enough. And so we need to make sure that we get more private sector. And that's why I'm actually quite delighted that we have some of the private sector with us on the panel, more private sector into the water sector. But you can't even fund it unless you can develop the bankable projects for it. So we have something at the African Development Bank called the Africa Water Facility. And that Africa Water Facility is the only facility that allows you to develop water, bankable water projects to be able to use for IPPs. And so in the last maybe 5 years, we've mobilized more than $6 billion of investment into the water sector by actually preparing very good bankable projects. So I think we are underinvesting in water. And we cannot solve that problem unless we ramp up support for financing.
And got to fill in that gap. And you mentioned the private sector is here. Lena focuses on desalination plants. We'll come to you in just a bit, but because we're still talking about irrigation, and it seems to have come up, Jai, I want to go to you because you're from UPL, India. You actually operate in multiple countries around the world, and you focus on agriculture. Could you give me a sense of what it takes to actually build a really strong infrastructure and ecosystem of irrigation technology that could help solve these problems that we've raised?
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here. UPL's involved in agriculture around the world, and really our focus over the last 10 years or so has been really focusing on farmer resilience. Food security, which is such a big topic, is directly related to the resilience of farmers. Resilience of farmers is directly related to, is impacted by climate change. And the example, President Adesanya talked about Zambia having 20% excess water and having a drought. Now, climate change is real, it's happening. Impact to cities like what we saw in Dubai last week is once in a while. And cities have an ability to sort of get back on their feet. But a farmer who loses his crop, he's ending up in abject poverty at the end of losing his crop. So our strategy has been to really really focus our research and development around climate resilient crops, drought tolerant crops. So in Zambia, we had a pilot project this year. We had meetings with the president, and we suggested that they transition from corn to sorghum, which is a much higher drought tolerant crop. And we had fantastic results this year. In fact, we had 100% yield on the sorghum plots, which we were showcasing. And all the corn around that area in the whole region died because of the drought. Wow. So not only water availability and investment in irrigation is very, very important. What is also important that we understand how the climate change is impacting agriculture and help the farmers transition to more sustainable, more climate resilient crops. And today we are able to predict weather patterns slightly better than we were before. So you could easily sort of guide agriculture and farmers to transition towards more sustainable crops. What we also do is develop technologies towards reduction in water, soil health. Better soil carbon reduces the need for water. It stores water. Microbial activity actually helps plants become more resilient to stress. So lots of technology there, we work in Brazil with large farmers with the same technology, and we are bringing it to Africa, India, Southeast Asia, where these farmers get actually hugely impacted, much more so than any other industry gets impacted by water stress.
Fascinating. And I'm listening to you saying, reverting to sorghum, we should go back to plants and crops that are indigenous to our areas, right? Anyway, that's on a side note. But Lena, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
You're focusing on desalination. You've got a fantastic history of doing incredible infrastructure work here in Saudi Arabia, and now you've gotten into this other industry, desalination. I mean, clearly it is a huge demand. You're now working with Aramco for a desalination plant.
Yes.
There are a couple of things that are really interesting here. Why did you get into this? And also, how important is focusing on evolving this technology of desalination, not only for this region, but I guess projecting the needs of this technology in other parts of the world?
So desalination is very important to any country. 50% of the population in the world, they have scarcity in water somehow a part of the year. So you can look at 50% of the whole world having this scarcity. What we have discussed about it with Aramco and the Saudi government, that 3.5 only from fresh water are present in the whole world underground, in underground glacier. So desalination is very important for any country. But the problem with desalination, it's very high cost first. So the cost of the desalination is really, you need very high capital.
Give me a sense of the cost.
So our desalination plant, the first desalination plant that we have done is around $700 million. Other plants is
and what kind of capacity are we
$1.2
talking
billion.
here?
I don't have the capacity right now in my mind, but it's like medium capacity.
Wow. So we're talking big money on desalination.
So when 70% of the water supply in Saudi Arabia is from desalinated water. So, but in Saudi Arabia, they can sustain that. But if you look at other countries like African countries, I agree with them. You need to have private sector more in that. But in order to have private sector to invest in desalination and putting all of that, there's many factors from the government itself to have. So the regulatory system, it has to be stable. The incentives, tax incentives. If you want to go to any country, you need to have long-term plan with them, because as an investor, you need to protect yourself as well. So there's a lot of factors for the private sector that needs to be taken into account for them to invest. We as Lamar, we're looking at Africa and different places in the world. But in Africa, there's a lot of risks for us especially there's the political risk, there's no long-term strategy. So there's a lot of aspects of desalination. Coming to your question regarding the energy consumption. So in Saudi Arabia, I can talk about Saudi Arabia. In the past, they were using the MSF technology, which was very highly needing for energy, which is consuming a lot of energy. Saudi Arabia has advanced in the desalination, so they are using more the RO, which is the reverse osmosis. The reverse osmosis is less consuming of energy. And we have gone a step forward in Saudi Arabia that we are using more environmentally friendly supplies, like using solar and other environmentally friendly. So we don't consume a lot of energy. The RO also, it's very good technology for the brine water as well.
Yeah. I was asking about this behind the scenes. You know, desalination is great, but you know, frankly, it does have an effect, an ecological effect, environmental effect with the brine water that you release back into the oceans.
Because it's back to the ocean, it will ruin the marine sector of the ocean. So in Saudi Arabia, they're putting a lot of R&D into that. So they're using different membrane, and they're trying to reuse the mineral into something else, recycling the minerals. So the water will go into the ocean with more minerals that can destroy the marine.
Okay, fantastic. I'll hold that thought, yes.
Yeah,
There's a few things there for me, but
just on the desalination, you know, most of the challenges with water-stressed countries in Africa is in North Africa. So you find like in Egypt, in Morocco, Tunisia, those are the places where water stress levels are quite high. And desalination, we've been financing desalination plants. For example, we funded the OCP, which is the world's largest phosphate manufacturing plant in Morocco with $150 million to do desalination. We also have major investment of about $2.6 billion that the African Development Bank is getting other multilateral financing institutions together for Egypt as part of their nexus for water, food, and energy, right? And that is doing several desalination plants. But I think on the point of the cost of desalination, you know, it takes 23 times. It's 23 times more expensive to do desalination if you actually get in surface water or underground water. So it's very, very expensive.
23 times more
23
expensive.
Times. It's very, very expensive. Berlina is correct. The fact that you can now have the use of renewable energy makes that cost to go down significantly, because now you probably get 1 cent, 0.01 cents per kilowatt. You know, so the cost is going down. That will help a lot on that. But I do want to correct one thing Alina was saying.
The perceptions of risk.
About risk, yeah.
Thank you very much. I knew you were going to go there.
I will not let that go. You know, if you take a look at it, people talk about risk. Yes, there's market risk, there's financial risk, there's political risk, and so on. But let's be clear, perception is not reality.
Thank you.
You take a look at Africa today, right? Bloomberg did an analysis of over 14 years looking at the default risk, defaults actually on infrastructure loans all across various parts of the world. What did they find? After 14 years, that the default rate in Africa is 1.9%. The one in Latin America is probably about, North America was about 6.6%, Latin America 10%. And if you look at Eastern Europe, it's almost at 12 to 14%. And so let's just get it real. That's the fact, you know. But that said, we have different types of instruments to try and to risk. So partial credit guarantees, partial risk guarantees. Yeah. You know, if you are here, political risk guarantee from MIGA, and all of those things can help significantly. So I think that what I always say about risk is that risk is not a reason why you don't make investment. It's how you manage your risk and having the right data on the risk distribution. And that data is why, for example, for the multilateral development banks, we decided to have something, it's at IFC, which is called the Global Emerging Markets Risk Database, which actually gives you the distribution of losses that you have from different types of investments that are being made by multilateral development banks. So data matters, and getting the right distribution of risk is very important.
Thank you. I knew you were going to go there, because I was about to ask you that question. Perceptions of risk. And by the way, a lot of countries across the continent, you can get double-digit returns. So it's a really fantastic investment strategy. But I want to go to you, Minister. If you could just give me a sense of what Lena had spoken about in terms of investing on the continent, the perception of risks and so forth, but also just generally whether the private sector actually wants to invest in water infrastructure. Is it attractive enough for the private sector to come in, or are you finding it hard in terms of selling that story?
Yes, certainly in the case of Zambia, we are now processing a number of applications for private sector people intending to supply water to the main city of Lusaka under the PPP model. And what we notice is that obviously, for obvious reasons, they are focusing on those residential areas where the affluent tend to live. And they are trying to segment it away from the poor areas. Obviously, as a government, we are trying to see how we can do a mixture of both categories of residents so that we don't leave anyone behind. Now, I also want to say that certainly in the case of Zambia, the water resources are abundant. From rivers, lakes, underground, even when there's a drought, there's still water underground. So what is required is capital to invest into that. Now, the issue is it costs money to supply water. But where you have a situation where you have a lot of urban people whose incomes are too low to be able to afford the water, then obviously you have to think about how to do it. So money can be there, water is there. The issue is what kind of financial engineering you put in place to enable that water also to get to the poor people. But also this brings me back to the earlier suggestion or the earlier topic of how do we grow the economies? We need to intervene in agriculture, mining, and other sectors so that the economy grows, wealth increases, poverty goes down. Because when people have got their own money, then of course they can be able to afford to buy the water. As long as we have stagnant economies or too much poverty, the ability of the ordinary urban person to buy water becomes curtailed. So we can't just act in cylinders. We must act across, grow the economy, make people rich. Most of them will be able to afford.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned this because we mustn't forget actually the low income earners and what it means for them when you're suddenly telling them, okay, I'm going to put in water infrastructure, but now water is going to cost you money. Especially when I visit many countries across the continent, and I just see how much time women and girls spend fetching water because of lack of infrastructure. And this goes across the board in other emerging markets as well. Then if you build that infrastructure, that costs money, and then suddenly you're charging people, the most vulnerable in the communities, to start paying for a service. So how do you square that circle? I mean, you know.
Yeah, you know, the fact of the matter is that water...
should it be free?
Well, I don't think anything should be free.
Anything?
No, except air should be free because it costs money to do things. But when it comes to the issue of water, yes, access is important, affordability is important, but we can't make success without the private sector. The critical things, I mean, as the minister was saying, we have to figure out to get the private sector in is we have to improve the sector governance itself.
But we just heard even the private sector wanted to go to the most affluent areas.
Yeah, but if you improve the policy and the regulatory environment,
yeah,
you will get a lot more private sector investing in the place. Second is that, you know, having the bankable projects that they can actually invest in is important. Back to what Lena was saying, the risk in some of those projects is very important. But when it comes also to water, the efficiency of use of water is very, very important. You know, non-revenue water losses is very, very high because you have weak and poorly functioning utilities. So how to improve those utilities is very important. One of the things that we do, you know, Ellen, is that we support the Africa Water Association, which has all these utilities, right, to be able to have the data have the algorithms that they need to improve their water. Take, for example, the case of AI. I mean, if you're actually producing water, you want to get the water there, but most of it is actually either being stolen or most of it is being lost in the process. So how you use technology to be able to map out the distribution of water, leakages in the water system, and to fix those things ahead of time. That's why the power of AI becomes very important. Take the case of smart meters. You know, if you have smart meters, for example, you know, we financed something in Kenya with them when they started introducing smart water meters, right? And that improved the efficiency and functioning and profitability and viability of their water utilities there. So yes, we need more private sector because the public sector alone cannot do it in a situation where the debt situation is very, very high. But we must also improve the functioning and the efficiencies of the water utilities that we have.
Brilliant. Okay, Jai, I want you to jump in here. Another interesting fact I was just reading about India, nearly 70% of water in India is contaminated. 70%. From a report. I mean, you work on the ground, so you can tell me.
Yeah, I mean, around the cities, because I think the investment in some of the growing cities is sort of slow. But in overall terms, you know, we have very large river systems. We have heavy rainfalls in the Himalayas. Everything gets washed out. Some of the areas where there has been unregulated industrialization, there has been some contamination of groundwater, but all that's part of growing up. And today, very, very strict industrial policies doesn't allow that to happen. So a lot of that is to do with some of the past unregulated growth. But today, you know, the environmental standards for even discharge of industrial water or cities, in fact, the regulation in some of the building code, every apartment block in Mumbai or large cities has to recycle all their water. They cannot discharge water. So they have come with a policy where each development complex has the responsibility to take all its sewage water, process it, and reuse it for gardening or something. So this is really innovation around the fact that these cities are growing at exponential rate, and they cannot get fresh pipelines installed fast enough, and the cost is so high. So how do you do it? You decentralize the system, and each unit recycles and reuses the water for a secondary use, like watering the gardens and all that. So I think it's a growing economy, and some of the past problems haunt India. But in general, we can say that going forward, I think those issues are being dealt with in a very, very organized way by the government.
So now that I've got the private sector with me, which is great, as President Adesina mentioned, what does the private sector want when getting into a PPP arrangement? What are you guys looking for? I mean, Lena mentioned some of those, stability, you know, lack.
So I was in fact in a discussion with the minister yesterday, and I said that we need, in agriculture, right, Africa has, I mean, it's well known that they import $50 billion of food. Actually, Africa should be exporting $50 billion or more of food. We need an economic environment where large-scale farming can really invest for the long term. Farmers invest in farmland to make cash flow on an annual basis, but really they make their money on land appreciation. So if your title on the land is not you know, over 99 years or whatever period, farmers will not come and invest, because every farmer knows that you will make money 1 year when there is good rain, commodity prices, the prices will collapse, there'll be bad rain, you lose money. But my underlying land will have an inflation-adjusted value, or more than that if I manage it very well. And then you have to invest. So if you look at some of the cash flows of the large farms in Brazil, the underlying asset is where the farmer says, yeah, that's my saving. Now I'm going to make money on it. So in case of Africa, I believe that, we need to work with African Development Bank. We need to work with MIGA, World Bank, where they give the security of the land. And, we are working with President HH on large tracts of land and saying that let's create an ecosystem by which somebody who comes in builds a large farm, 20,000 hectare farms. You have an ecosystem where the trading companies come in, the machinery companies come in, seed companies come in, and work with a group of 500,000 hectares. What we call is a special zone where foreign investors get a long-term right on the land, and it'll create an ecosystem which sort of drives a lot of investment, including water, because a successful farming community will pay for water. A successful farming community will want high-quality seeds, fertilizer. There are some huge failures in Africa because of logistics, not enough infrastructure, not enough farming companies in that zone. So I think there is a way to fix this by creating an ecosystem which allows the peace of mind to investors, saying that, no, I'm here for the next 100 years, and I will have good times and bad times, like in every market.
Absolutely. There's lots of cycles. I mean, I want Sadashina to jump in here. You were saying you wanted to.
No, absolutely. Let's not forget the smallholder farmers are critical in everything.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
The rice that you and I eat is not produced by very large farmers. It's produced by small farmers in Thailand, in Vietnam, and all of that. And 80% of the farmers in Africa are smallholder farmers. And when there's nothing wrong in being small, what is wrong is not operating under bounded constraints of lack of access to technology, to finance, to infrastructure, market information, to being able to raise your productivity and therefore participate effectively. What we've done at the Africa Development Bank, and we're doing, of course, I'm the first president of a multilateral financial institution that comes from agriculture background.
He was the agriculture minister in Nigeria, and he completely changed the playing field in rice production in Nigeria. He did incredible work there.
Absolutely, Elena. But I want to make 3 points. One is what he was saying about the issue of technologies, or climate-resilient agricultural technology, and he's right. I agree with him in terms of crop diversification to more drought-tolerant crops. But take the case of wheat, for example. Wheat is a temperate crop, right? In Africa, Africa spends billions of dollars importing wheat. At the African Development Bank, we provided, through a platform called Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, which brings the global R&D centers together with the national and regional and seed companies, we provided heat-tolerant wheat varieties to farmers in Ethiopia. Right? I was the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. In 2018, they grew that on only 5,000 hectares. Last year, they grew it on 2.2 million hectares.
Wow.
They were able to become self-sufficient in wheat in 4 years, right? Today, they're a net exporter of wheat. Take the case of climate water-efficient maize, for example, which is a maize variety. We're talking about maize. Maize is not drought-tolerant, but you have water-efficient maize varieties today. We provided those for farmers in Eastern Africa when there was drought in 2019 and 2020. Well, guess what? It was grown by 5.6 million households, right? That's what allowed them to be able to avoid that particular drought. Take rice that you and I eat. I can eat rice 5 times a day. I don't know about you, but we provided them with climate-efficient rice varieties, grown today on 3.2 million households. And Secretary Blinken from the US came to see that with me when I was there. So technology matters. We have the technology to do that. Second is to the point of the private sector. He's absolutely correct on that. Because at the end of the day, agriculture, you need to have infrastructure density that allows the private sector to locate close to where the zones of production is. Today, 80% of what we produce is lost because there's lack of logistics.
There's no roads,
to move that
no storage.
To where the guy. And the guys that are actually producing manufacturing and processing food are located close to the ports. And tell me, which farms are next to the port? And so what we decided to do is we are creating what's called special agro-industrial processing zones, which comes to the point that you're raising. These are new economic zones. We're putting $1.6 billion into it. We're doing 22 of those now in 11 countries, where private sector will locate into areas that have enabled infrastructure, power, water, roads, irrigation, and also logistic infrastructure, so that the embedded risk is much lower. The transaction cost is much lower. They can buy the produce from the farmers, process and add value, and then you have more efficient value chains that you can compete, regionally, but also globally. So those are very, very important. In fact, just about in Nigeria, I'll give an example in Nigeria, which is my home country. We started with 8 of those special agro-industrial processing zones. Nigeria exports oil. But you tell me, who drinks oil? Who smokes gas? I like, you can have oil, you can have gas, yeah, but everybody eats food 3 times a day or 4 times a day. So how we produce food in a way that is competitive is the key. In Nigeria, for example, together with the Islamic Development Bank here, I was glad that we were together with them for their 50th anniversary here. We invest in $520 million to do 8 of those zones in Nigeria. Now the government comes back that they want to do 22 more states in Nigeria. So I want to say something that private sector is very important. Smallholder farmers is very important. Having consolidated infrastructure to get logistics right is important. Why? Because the size of the food and agriculture market in Africa will be worth $1 trillion by 2030. And so Africa needs to be a global powerhouse in food and agriculture. We have 65% of all the uncultivated arable land in the world. Nobody eats potential. They've got to unlock that potential. So I think as we deal with that, the challenge is climate change. Yes, I think we've been talking about climate change, but let's not forget that that shouldn't be a constraint, because the technologies to do that and what more water efficient technologies and better irrigation management systems allow us today to get more grain per drop of water through drip irrigation and other types of efficient ways of managing water.
Brilliant. Lena, are you going to get into Africa in an aggressive way? You're the best advocate for why you should invest on the continent.
Actually, in Lamar,
are you convinced?
Yeah, I'm very convinced now.
But not just desalination. We're going to talk about irrigation.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about all the other technologies.
We're looking at investing in Africa, actually. Yeah. We've been trying to reach someone in Africa to see how we can invest.
Get a card.
I will make that easier for you.
There we go. And what it is the last economic frontier, the most important economic frontier. I think what was very telling for me during the opening session here at the World Economic Forum, we had both the president of Rwanda and the president of Nigeria on stage. And that was a very strong message. Africa and this region are going to be investing heavily in each other, that Africa is the place to really be looking at from a renewable energy perspective, from a,
Now you got me locked. You got me locked.
Well, that's fantastic. Did you want to add anything else?
So, yes, we've been looking, as I said, to look into how to invest in Africa in different things, okay, especially water, energy, irrigation system, and some food industry. So we've been trying to support some of the vertical farming startups that we can also support and do in Africa as well. But as well, as he said, I want to reiterate, I said stability. It is because the investor comes, like everybody said, and my colleague, that he needs to have a long term. He's not going there for 5 years and getting out. So once you're there for a long term, okay? And this is our target in Lamar. We go into a country, we continue in that country, because the longer you are there, the more you are investing. Okay, and with the financial instrument that they're providing, with the crops and the new crops that they can be more water resistant, more they can sustain drought, it can be much more for us.
Well, you're in luck because one of the most stable economies on the continent is Zambia. So you've got a developmental bank you can work with. You have a fantastic economy to invest in. So, Minister, what's paramount for you right now in terms of the investment needs? While we've got investors sitting at the table here.
Well, as I said,
It's a good time to kind of put this
as I
forward.
said in my opening remarks, this is about collaboration. The land is there, the water is there.
And the ease of doing business is there as well in Zambia.
Yes, the ease of business is also taking place, breaking down corruption, breaking down bureaucratic red tapes and so forth. So we welcome the colleagues, especially from here, from the Gulf. I know there are many actors here in the Gulf who have invested into large-scale agriculture in Brazil. Africa, certainly Zambia, is also open for that.
Yeah.
So bring your money. I can assure you that you'll be smiling all the way to the bank from the profits that you'll be making.
Since I'm a banker, let me just support the minister on that one. My sister, the president of the Development Bank of South Africa, is here. So, Vitumelo, you're listening to this conversation. So we got work to do on that. But I just wanted to say that, a critical thing is going to be what we do with the Batoka Gorge. Batoka Gorge is the dam that can provide us 2,400 megawatts of electricity, which is going to be very critical for doing everything in Zambia, but also Zimbabwe and all of that. I think that's important. But also we need to invest in the interconnector, because I was with the president of, your president, President Ichilima, and also President Suluhu Hassan, just a few days ago in Tanzania, where they were celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Tanganyika Union and so on. And we're discussing about this particular issue. And we said, power is everything. You've got to be able to have access to power. So the interconnector, right, the regional power pools that provides power, because whether it's seed companies, fertilizer companies, or desalination, whatever you want to do or processing, you need to have power. I think that one, it's very important to have. But I also want to say one thing that sometimes also bothers me. Okay, sometimes we suffer in the middle of plenty, and you wonder why.
Yeah.
For example, take a look at Malawi today. Malawi is going through a very serious drought. But why is that when you have Lake Malawi there? This Lake Malawi alone is enough to make Malawi a powerhouse in agriculture. So when I was there and in Tanzania, I picked up my phone and I called the president. I said, Mr. President, we got to fix Lake Malawi, because Lake Malawi, we can use that to produce a lot of food so that whenever you have drought, it's just a question of moving food from your areas of surplus that have been supported through Lake Malawi to the areas of deficit. You shouldn't have a situation where you can't produce food. So I just say that we need to invest right in water efficiency. We have to invest right in productivity growth. We have to invest to make sure that we are getting more private sector into this particular space. But I think most importantly also, we have to make sure that, he was saying something that I like about water treatment, the wastewater.
Yeah.
With urbanization, Eleni, we have today...
But where's that water going to go? You need to, yeah.
But at the African Development Bank, we're investing heavily, for example, in Egypt, right? They have something there called Abu Rawash. Abu Rawash is their largest wastewater treatment plant, which is, we finance that provides water to be treated for 8 million people. There's another one they have, Gabal El Asfar, which is again one of the largest wastewater treatment plants in the world. So turning that into that. So what I'm saying is that we have to improve water reservoirs, how we harvest water, how we manage underground water. We have to make sure we deploy AI and other things to make things better. We have to be able to predict weather patterns. And then we have to be able to provide insurance to farmers in the face of this exogenous risk. One thing that we have at the African Development Bank for that is that we have something called the Africa Disaster Risk Insurance Facility. And that facility actually pays for premiums for countries to protect themselves against extreme weather patterns. Now we're trying to scale that up now to $1 billion with Africa Climate Risk Insurance for adaptation. That will actually provide farmers, 20 million farmers, with access to to climate information, and also 20 million farmers with crop insurance and livestock insurance. So these are the things we all have to link.
So I'm glad, a brilliant way to close, but I'm actually glad I've got my fellow South African from the DBSA, Development Bank of South Africa. And it got me thinking, Ms. Mosako, You know, a lot of infrastructure in South Africa is starting to really come under pressure, specifically water infrastructure. And there's one question I haven't asked, is whether we need to start privatizing some of the water infrastructure that we have across the continent, and whether, you know, the private sector can come in, because you've got to think about whether you're going to privatize parts of that system.
I'm not sure whether privatization is necessarily the way to go, but I think I would say this, that you need to have cost-reflective tariffs. Water tariffs have to be quite good.
So there can be a PPP, right?
So, and you also need a lot of blended finance to be able to bring down the cost of investing in water because of the public nature of it. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. But really good to speak to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
For a fantastic panel.
Just last comment is I think it's great to have a president of African Development Bank who actually comes from agriculture. And I think that title should be common between African Development Bank President and Agriculture Minister of Africa. Should be a common title.
So we're a new title for you. You're the new Agriculture Minister of Africa. We're going to have to speak to you. You're just passionate about it. Fantastic.
I think that can transform.
He got me convinced.
There we go, got you convinced. And then please also speak to the DBSA president as well. She'll give you some ideas on what to do in South Africa as well. And then Minister, thank you so much for having
Thank you.
make time for us today. Thank you. Round of applause. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.